The Scribe's Daughter, a novel of Middle Kingdom Egypt. Historical fiction set in the 12th dynasty circa 1870 BCE. Part 1. The Lotus Opens. Chapter 1. Dawn over Thebes. The first light of Ra touched the eastern cliffs, painting them the color of beaten copper. Nakht woke as he always did, before the city stirred, before even the priests began their morning hymns in the great temple of Amun. The air through the window carried the scent of the Nile, that eternal smell of water and silt and life itself. He rose from the sleeping mat carefully, so as not to wake Nefret. His wife lay curled on her side, one hand tucked beneath her cheek like a child, though she was a woman of 38 years and had borne him 2 children. In the dim pre-dawn light, he could see the first silver threads in her dark hair. When had those appeared? The question stirred something in his chest, not quite sadness, not quite fear. Awareness, perhaps. The awareness that time moved forward like the Nile's current, carrying them all toward the western lands whether they willed it or not. Nakht poured water from the storage jar into the copper basin, splashing his face and arms. The water was cool, pulled from the well the evening before. He performed his ablutions methodically, speaking the morning prayer under his breath. Homage to you, O Ra, at your rising. You illuminate the 2 lands with your beauty. In the next room, separated by a reed curtain, he heard stirring. Kimwasit, his son. The boy was 12 years old and took his studies seriously, sometimes too seriously. Nakht smiled. Better a son who worked hard than one who thought birth alone entitled him to respect. He dressed in his professional clothing, a freshly laundered white linen kilt that fell to his knees, pleated with precision by Nefret's skilled hands. His leather sandals, well worn but well maintained. Around his neck, a simple amulet of Thoth, the ibis-headed god of scribes and wisdom. His father had given it to him on the day he'd completed his training 26 years ago. May your hand be as steady as Thoth's, may your eye be as keen as Horus's, may your tongue speak only Marat. His father's voice, long silent now, still echoed in memory. Nakht gathered his tools with the care of ritual. His writing kit was his most valuable possession after his family, a wooden palette with 2 wells for ink, one black, made from soot, one red, made from ochre. His reed brushes, each cut and chewed at the tip to create the proper fraying. A small knife for cutting papyrus and trimming reeds. A leather case for scrolls. A small pot of water for mixing ink. Everything fit into his leather satchel, worn smooth by years of carrying. He placed the small wooden statue of Thoth at the center of the room's shrine, next to the figure of Tauret that protected women in childbirth, Nefret's guardian. By the time he emerged to the main room, Nefret was up, rekindling the fire in the clay oven. Nefret, their daughter, was grinding grain between 2 stones, the eternal morning sound older than the pyramids themselves. The rhythmic scraping spoke of continuity, of countless generations of women performing this same task. But Nefret, Nakht noticed, was watching her younger brother. Kimwasit sat cross-legged in the corner, an ostrakon, a smooth piece of pottery, balanced on his knees. He was copying text from a worn papyrus propped before him, his young face scrunched in concentration. His reed brush moved carefully, forming the hieratic signs, the cursive script of daily business, faster than the formal hieroglyphs carved in temple walls. "Speak gently with those who are violent," Kimwasit murmured, reading as he wrote. "Win over the hostile by kindness," Nefret said quietly, not looking up from her grinding. Kimwasit glanced at her, then at the papyrus. His face flushed. "I know. I was just thinking," Nefret finished, a smile playing at her lips. "Nefret," Nefret said sharply. "The grinding." "Yes, mother." But Nakht had seen the exchange. He met his daughter's eyes for a moment, eyes that were too bright, too curious, too hungry for the world beyond these walls. She was 16 years old. Most girls her age were already married, already managing households of their own. They ate breakfast together on the rooftop as the sun climbed higher, as they did every morning. Bread still warm from the oven, spread with a paste of mashed fava beans seasoned with garlic and cumin. Onions, sliced thin. A bit of dried fish from the markets. Beer, slightly sweet, the drink of Egypt from pharaoh to field hand. The city was waking around them. Thebes, greatest city of Upper Egypt, home to 200,000 souls. From their rooftop, Nakht could see the river, already busy with boats, fishing vessels, cargo ships, reed papyrus rafts. Beyond the Nile's western bank, the cliffs glowed in the morning light, honeycombed with tombs of the noble dead. And rising above everything, dominating the city like a second sun, the great temple of Amun. Its massive pylon gates faced east to greet the dawn. Its obelisks caught the light and flung it skyward. Its walls enclosed a city within a city. Courtyards, halls, shrines, treasuries, workshops, granaries, and the sacred lake where the priests purified themselves. Nakht had worked in the temple administration for 18 years, since he was 24 and newly married. He knew its rhythms, its hierarchies, its secrets. The temple was not just a house of the gods, it was an economic engine that owned vast tracts of land throughout the province, employed thousands of people, and controlled resources that would make many nomarchs envious. "Father," Kimwasit asked, breaking the comfortable silence, "when will I be allowed to write on papyrus?" "When you've proven you won't waste it," Nakht said, but not unkindly. "Papyrus is expensive. Every sheet represents someone's labor, cutting the reeds, processing them, pressing them. A careless student with papyrus is like a clumsy soldier with a bronze sword. The tool is too valuable for uncertain hands. But I'm not careless. Show me." Nakht gestured to the ostracon. Kimwasit handed it over proudly. Nakht examined the text, maxims from the instructions of Ptah-hotep, a wisdom text already ancient when the pyramids were new. The signs were mostly correct, though the boy had a tendency to crowd them together. His hand would improve with practice. "Good," Nakht said. "But look here, this sign for kindness. You've made it too narrow. It should be broader, more open. Like this." He picked up the brush, dipped it in the water pot, then in the black ink, and demonstrated on the edge of the ostracon. "See? The sign itself should embody what it represents." "That's beautiful," Nefret said softly. Everyone looked at her. She blushed, returning her attention to her bread. Mereret's expression was complex, pride and worry braided together. Nakht understood. He'd made a decision 16 years ago, when Nefret was learning to walk and he'd caught her playing with Kimwasit's practice shards, arranging the signs in patterns. He'd taught her to read. It had been an impulse, a father's indulgence. But impulses had consequences. Knowledge, once given, couldn't be taken back. And a literate woman in Egypt was not unheard of. Queens and noblewomen sometimes learned, but a middle-class girl? That was unusual enough to be dangerous. The sun was fully risen now. Time to go. Nakht shouldered his satchel. Kimwasit gathered his own smaller kit, a student set, carefully packed. The boy would walk part way with his father, then turn toward the temple school where he studied with 24 other boys training for the scribal profession. At the doorway, Nakht turned back. Meret was already moving toward her workshop, where her loom waited. Nefret was clearing the breakfast things, but she looked up, and their eyes met again. In that moment, Nakht saw his daughter clearly, not as the child she'd been, not as the dutiful wife she might become, but as herself. A person with thoughts and dreams that might not fit the shape the world had prepared for her. The sight filled him with fierce love and fiercer fear. "May your day be blessed," he said to his family, the traditional farewell. "And yours," they replied in unison. Then he stepped out into the street, into the city, into the great machinery of Egypt's administration, carrying with him the weight of decisions not yet made but already pressing like floodwaters against a dam. Chapter 2. The Weight of Accounts. The temple complex sprawled across the eastern bank like a small kingdom. Nakht entered through the southern gate, showing his identification seal to the guards, a small clay token impressed with his name and title, Nakht, Chief Scribe of the Granary of Amun. The courtyard beyond bustled with activity. Priests in their white linen robes moved between buildings. Workers carried baskets, drove donkeys loaded with goods, swept the ground, repaired walls. The air smelled of incense and bread baking, of livestock and perfumed oils, of the thousand activities that sustained both gods and men. The granary complex occupied the northern section of the temple grounds, a series of long, vaulted storerooms built of mud brick, each large enough to house 50 men standing upright. The roofs were strong enough to walk upon, and guards patrolled them day and night. The wealth of Thebes was measured not in gold but in grain. Nakht's office was a small room adjoining the main storage halls. Shelves lined the walls, packed with papyrus scrolls arranged by date and type, receipts, disbursements, inventory records, correspondence with estate overseers. The room's one window looked out onto the Nile. His assistant, Jedi, was already at work. The young man sat cross-legged on a reed mat, a partially unrolled scroll before him, his brush moving swiftly as he copied figures from a wooden tally board. "Morning, Chief," Jedi said without looking up. He was 28, ambitious, and skilled enough that he'd probably have Nakht's position within 10 years. If he learned patience. If he learned to see beyond the next promotion. "Morning." Nakht set down his satchel and surveyed the day's work. 3 junior scribes would arrive shortly, younger men still learning the intricacies of large-scale accounting. What arrived overnight? 2 shipments. One from the estate at Koptos, Emma wheat, 63 hecat, all accounted for. One from the estate at Ashut, barley, 45 hecat, receipts in order. And the shipment from Amenemat's estate? That was due yesterday. Jedi's brush paused. Just for a moment. It arrived. The overseer says the harvest was light this year. Poor inundation in that district. Something in Jedi's voice made Nakht look up sharply. "Show me the receipt." Jedi unrolled a fresh papyrus. The ink still bore the faint smell of recent writing. Nakht read the hieratic script quickly, his eyes trained to spot discrepancies. From the estate of Amenemat, overseer of the temple lands at the 5th Cataract District, Emma wheat, 80 hecat. Delivered by the boat Captain Senefer on the 15th day of the 3rd month of Akhat, year 19 of His Majesty Senesret III, may he live forever. Nakht pulled out the previous correspondence. The order sent to Amenemat 3 months ago, the expected yield based on the acreage under cultivation. He spread both documents on his work table, comparing them. "This is short," he said flatly, "by 50 hecat, nearly a third of the expected yield." The overseer says. I can read what the overseer says. Poor inundation. Nakht tapped the papyrus. But I also remember last year's reports. That district had an excellent flood. The fields were expanded. Even with a moderate inundation this year, the yield should have been higher, not lower. Jedi set down his brush carefully. Nakht. Amenemat is well connected. His brother-in-law serves in the nomarch's household. The nomarch himself appointed Amenemat to that oversight position. I'm aware of his connections. Then perhaps the simplest explanation is the correct one. Poor harvest. We record what we received, file the report, and move on. Nakht studied his assistant. Jedi came from a humbler background than Nakht. His father had been a temple doorkeeper who'd scraped together enough to send his bright son to scribe school. Every position Jedi had earned, he'd earned through skill and careful navigation of temple politics. "You're suggesting we falsify the records," Nakht said quietly. "I'm suggesting we record what we received and don't create problems where none exist. We weren't there for the harvest. We don't know what the actual yield was. Maybe the estate manager's assessment was overly optimistic. Maybe disease struck the grain. Maybe workers stole some before it reached the boats. There are a dozen explanations. And if the real explanation is that Amenemat has been skimming..." Jedi spread his hands. Then he's been clever enough not to leave evidence. We're scribes, Nakht, not judges. Our job is to record, not investigate. The words hung in the air between them. The morning light slanted through the window, illuminating dust motes. From outside came the sound of workers singing as they unloaded cargo, a hymn to Happy, God of the inundation, giver of life. Nakht thought of his father's words, Marat is not always easy. If it were, it wouldn't need a word. If it were, we wouldn't need scribes to maintain it. Marat, the untranslatable concept that undergirded all Egyptian civilization. Order, justice, truth, balance, cosmic harmony. The opposite of Isfet, chaos, lies, disorder. Pharaoh's primary duty was to maintain Marat. The gods demanded it. The dead were judged by it, their hearts weighed against Marat's feather of truth. And scribes. Scribes were Marat's accountants. Get me the records from Amenemhat's estate for the past 3 years, Nakht said. All harvests, all deliveries. And the original land surveys. Nakht. Do it. Jedi held his gaze for a long moment, then bowed his head slightly. As you command, Chief. He rose and moved to the archive shelves, pulling down scrolls. Nakht returned his attention to the current receipt, studying every sign, every number, looking for the truth hidden in reed brush marks and black ink. The other junior scribes arrived, Hori, Beck, and young Amenhotep, still an apprentice. Nakht set them to their usual tasks, measuring incoming grain shipments, updating inventory records, preparing disbursement orders for temple workers' rations. The granary fed not just the priests but hundreds of workers, stonemasons, carpenters, gardeners, musicians, guards, washermen, brewers. Each had a specified daily ration based on their role and status. The calculations were complex, requiring solid knowledge of fractions and measurements. Nakht supervised with half his attention while studying the historical records Jedi had pulled. What he found was illuminating. 3 years ago, when Amenemhat had first taken over the estate, yields had been normal, consistent with the acreage and expected harvest. 2 years ago, they'd begun dropping. Just slightly. 5%. Easily explained by natural variation. Last year, 8% below expected. This year, 30% below. But, and this was interesting, there'd been no corresponding reduction in the estate's other productions. The orchard still produced their expected yields of figs and dates. The cattle herds remained stable. The fish ponds delivered their quotas. Only the grain was consistently short. Nakht sat back, closing his eyes, thinking. Grain was the most valuable commodity because it was the most portable, the most easily converted to other goods or services. Figs rotted. Cattle had to be fed and driven. But grain could be stored, shipped, traded, sold. If someone wanted to skim temple resources for personal profit, grain was the obvious target. Nakht. He opened his eyes. Hori stood before him, holding a tally board. There's a discrepancy in the ration calculations for the Stonemasons Guild. The numbers from last month don't match this month's opening inventory. Show me. For the next 2 hours, Nakht lost himself in numbers and cross-references, tracking down a mistake made 3 months prior, a sign miscopied, a calculation carried incorrectly. It was tedious, exacting work. It was the work that kept Egypt functioning. By midday, the immediate crisis was resolved. The stonemasons would get their proper rations. Records were corrected. Marat was maintained, at least in this small corner of the world. But the larger question remained, what to do about Amenemhat? I'm going to send an inquiry upriver, Nakht said to Jedi. An official request for clarification about the harvest yield, along with an announcement that I'll be conducting a personal inspection of the estate next month. Jedi's face tightened. That's your decision to make, Chief. Yes, it is. Amenemhat won't appreciate it. I imagine not. Neither will his connections. The overseer of scribes appointed me to this position because I'm thorough and honest. If he wanted someone who'd overlook irregularities, he'd have chosen differently. Jedi nodded slowly. I hope you're right about that. After Jedi left for the midday break, Nakht sat alone in his office, looking out at the Nile. The river flowed north, always north, toward the delta and the sea. Unchanging and ever-changing. On his desk lay the morning's correspondence from the vizier's office in Memphis. He'd read it earlier, but set it aside to deal with the grain shortage. Now he unrolled it again. The letter was written in formal hieratic, the language elevated, the calligraphy beautiful. To all chief scribes in the administration of Upper and Lower Egypt, His Majesty Senusret III, Lord of the Two Lands, may he live forever, is engaged in the construction of his eternal horizon at Dasha. This great work requires scribes of exceptional skill to manage the logistics of workers, materials, and supplies. It went on to describe the opportunity, a 2-year assignment, possibly extending to 3 or 4. Housing provided. Increased stipend. The chance to work on a royal project, which would be noted in one's records and likely lead to advancement. The chance to serve the pharaoh directly. Nakht had mentioned it briefly to his family at breakfast, but he hadn't yet told them how seriously he was considering it. Memphis and its necropolis at Dasha were far to the north, 10 days' journey by boat. It would mean uprooting everything, leaving Thebes, leaving the familiar, leaving safety. But it would also mean leaving the increasingly tangled politics of the Theban temple administration. It would mean a fresh start. And, he barely let himself think this, it might mean opportunities for his children that wouldn't exist here. Particularly for Nefret. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. A shadow fell across his doorway. Nakht looked up to see the overseer of scribes himself, Senusret, a man of 50 with a stern face and intelligent eyes. He wore the leopard skin of his priestly office draped over his white linen robes. Nakht rose immediately, bowing. Overseer. This is an honor. Nakht. I heard you're questioning receipts from a Menemat's estate. Oh. Word traveled fast. I'm performing my duty, Overseer. The yields have been consistently below expectations. Senusret stepped into the office, closing the door behind him, an ominous gesture. A Menemat's brother-in-law came to see me this morning. He's concerned you're conducting a, how did he put it, overzealous investigation based on incomplete understanding of agricultural realities. With respect, Overseer, I've been managing these accounts for 18 years. I understand agricultural realities quite well. I'm sure you do. Senusret moved to the window, looking out at the Nile as Nakht had done minutes before. Tell me something, Nakht. In your years of service, have you found your position rewarding? Very much so, Overseer. And you've built a good life for your family. A house, a workshop for your wife, education for your children. Yes. All based on your salary and your reputation. Your reputation for competence, discretion, and wisdom. There it was. The gentle pressure. Not quite a threat. Not quite a warning. Just a reminder of what could be lost. My reputation is also based on integrity, Nakht said quietly. On maintaining Marat in my corner of the administration. Senusret turned from the window. His expression was unreadable. Marat is balance, Nakht. Not rigidity. Sometimes precision must be tempered with prudence. And sometimes prudence is just another word for looking away. The words hung between them. Nakht's heart hammered. He just contradicted a superior, pushed back against subtle pressure from someone with the power to destroy his career. But Senusret surprised him. The older man's stern face softened into something almost like a smile. Your father trained you well. You knew my father. We studied together, briefly, before our paths diverged. He was stubborn too. Nefret moved toward the door, then paused. "That letter from the vizier's office, I assume you received a copy?" "I did." "The Pyramid Project. It's a good opportunity. Your skills would be valued there." Nakht understood the subtext immediately. "Take the assignment. Leave Thebes. Let this situation with Amenemhat resolve itself in your absence." "I'm considering it," Nakht said carefully. "Consider quickly. The vizier wants his scribes in place before the next inundation." Nefret opened the door, then looked back. "For what it's worth, Nakht, I hope you do investigate Amenemhat properly. If he's corrupt, he should be caught. But I'm also old enough to know that what should happen and what will happen are often different things. Choose your battles. Protect your family. That's wisdom too." Then he was gone, leaving Nakht alone with his conscience and his records and the unchanging flow of the river beyond his window. Chapter 3. The Weaver's Hands. While Nakht navigated the complexities of temple politics, Nefret worked in her own domain, a workshop attached to the eastern side of their house, open to catch the morning light. The loom dominated the space, a horizontal ground loom, its wooden beams worn smooth by years of use. Warp thread stretched taut between the beams, secured by clay weights. Nefret sat cross-legged before it, her shuttle flying between the threads with practiced precision, building fabric row by row, the rhythm as familiar as breathing. Weaving was meditation. Weaving was mathematics. Weaving was prayer. Each thread had to be counted, each row had to be beaten tight with a wooden sword beater, each pattern had to be planned in advance and held in the mind. A mistake made in the morning would reveal itself only in the afternoon, requiring hours of work to be undone. Nefret worked beside her on a smaller practice loom, learning the craft as Nefret had learned from her own mother, as her mother had learned from hers, back through generations beyond counting. The girl's hands were quick and sure. She had the touch, that indefinable quality that separated adequate weavers from exceptional ones. "You're tensing your shoulders," Nefret said without looking up from her own work. Nefret exhaled, consciously relaxing. "Sorry. I was thinking." Thinking makes your body tighten. Feel the work instead. Let your hands know what to do. They worked in companionable silence for a while. The only sounds were the soft clack of the shuttle, the rhythmic tap of the beater, and from outside, the city waking, vendors calling their wares, donkeys braying, children laughing. 2 neighborhood girls arrived for their morning lesson, Nakht and Nakht, both 14, both from families prosperous enough to pay for their daughters to learn a valuable trade. Nefret taught them in exchange for copper and linen, supplementing Nakht's temple salary. It wasn't unusual for women to manage businesses. Egyptian women could own property, enter contracts, even divorce their husbands if necessary. The law recognized them as individuals, not possessions. Still, there were limits. There were always limits. "Good morning, Mistress Nefret," the girls chimed together, bowing their heads respectfully. "Good morning. Show me your thread counts from yesterday." The girls produced their practice pieces, coarse linen, beginning work. Nefret examined each, nodding approval at Nakht's steady progress, gently correcting Nakht's tendency to pull the weft too tight. "Linen should breathe," Nefret explained, holding up the fabric. "See how this bunches. The threads are strangling each other. Give them room. Trust that the weave will hold." "Yes, mistress." As the girls settled into their work, Nefret returned to her own project, a length of fine royal linen commissioned by Lady Satsobek for her daughter's wedding trousseau. Royal linen was the finest grade, woven so tightly that it was nearly transparent, suitable for the wealthy and the gods. It required thread spun impossibly thin, tension maintained perfectly, absolute concentration. This was the work that had built Nefret's reputation. Temple suppliers knew her name. Wealthy families requested her specifically. She took pride in that, in being known for her skill, in being sought after, in contributing meaningfully to her family's prosperity. Nakht's salary as Chief Scribe provided stability, but Mereret's income provided comfort. The copper she earned bought better food, funded Kimwasit's education, allowed them to make offerings at the temple that befitted their status. It gave them security. And security, Meret had learned early, was precious beyond gold. She had been born into a scribal family. Her father had served in the treasury of the nomarch. She'd learned to read as a child, sitting at his feet while he worked, absorbing knowledge like linen absorbed dye. But when she'd come of age, there'd been no place for a literate woman in the administration. She'd learned weaving instead, channeling her mind's precision into her hand skill. She'd never regretted it. Weaving had given her independence, purpose, mastery. But sometimes, late at night, she wondered what might have been if she'd been born male. Would she have risen to overseer? Would she have managed warehouses, corresponding with officials throughout the two lands? Would she have been more than someone's wife, someone's mother, however skilled her hands? The thought was disloyal to examine too closely. She had a good life. A good husband who respected her. Healthy children. Meaningful work. What more should she want? Mistress Meret. She looked up. Lady Satsobek stood in the doorway, accompanied by a servant carrying a basket. The lady was perhaps 50, her face lined but elegant, her wig elaborate, her linen dress pleated and belted with embroidered cloth. She wore enough jewelry to announce her wealth without vulgarity, a gold collar, bracelets, rings. Meret rose immediately, brushing dust from her own simpler dress. Lady Satsobek. Welcome. Please, come in. The girls scrambled to their feet, bowing deeply. Nefret did the same, her eyes downcast, but Meret noticed how her daughter watched the lady from beneath her lashes, taking in every detail of dress, jewelry, bearing. I hope I'm not interrupting, Lady Satsobek said, though they both knew she could interrupt whenever she wished. I wanted to see how the commission progresses. Of course. Meret gestured to the loom where the royal linen was taking shape. I'm perhaps a third complete. The work goes well. Lady Satsobek moved closer, studying the fabric with a knowing eye. She reached out, touching it lightly. Beautiful. The thread count is extraordinary. My daughter will be pleased. I'm honored to create for such an important occasion. Her wedding is in 3 months. Will that be sufficient time? More than sufficient, my lady. Good. Lady Satsobek's gaze drifted to where Nefret stood with the other girls. Which of these students is your daughter? Nefret, my lady. Mereret's heart picked up pace. There was something in the lady's tone, appraisal, calculation. Come here, child. Nefret approached, moving gracefully, her head bowed. Lady Satsobek studied her with frank interest, the kind of look wealthy women gave when evaluating potential brides for their sons or nephews. How old are you? 16 inundations, my lady. And you weave? Yes, my lady. My mother teaches me. Show me your hands. Nefret held them out. Lady Satsobek examined them, the calluses from the shuttle, the small scars from sharp reed, the strong fingers. Working hands, but elegant too. The hands of someone who created beauty. She's skilled. Lady Satsobek asked Meret. Very skilled, my lady. She has excellent judgment for pattern and tension. Pretty too, in her way. Not conventional, but distinctive. Good bones. The lady spoke about Nefret as though she were a piece of livestock at market, not unkindly, but matter-of-factly. Is she betrothed? There it was. The question Meret had been dreading and expecting in equal measure. Not yet, my lady. Ah. Lady Satsobek's eyes gleamed with interest. I have a nephew, my late sister's son. He's a potter, quite successful. Supplies the temple, some noble houses. He's 22, established, of good character. He saw your daughter at the festival last month and made inquiries. Nefret's mind raced. A potter, successful, connected to a family like Lady Satsobek's, it would be an excellent match. Probably better than Nefret could expect, given that Nakht, for all his position, was not noble-born. My husband and I would be honored to discuss such a possibility, Nefret said carefully. Good. I'll have my nephew's father contact you formally. Lady Satsobek smiled, satisfied, then turned back to the loom. I'll send payment for the first half of the work, shall we say 20 deben of copper? That's generous, my lady. Quality deserves appropriate compensation. She gestured to her servant, who set down the basket. I brought some bread from our baking, fresh this morning, and some dates, for your household. Thank you, my lady. After Lady Satsobek left, the workshop felt too quiet. The girls had returned to their looms, but they kept glancing at Nefret with new interest, the girl who'd attracted the attention of a wealthy family. Nefret herself stood frozen, her face unreadable. Back to work, Nefret said gently. But as the morning progressed, she watched her daughter from the corner of her eye. Nefret's hands moved mechanically through the weaving, but her mind was clearly elsewhere. Her shoulders were tense again. Thinking. At midday, Nefret dismissed the students and served the noon meal: bread, cheese, onions, cucumbers, the dates from Lady Satsobek. Nefret ate in silence. Your father and I will discuss the proposal, Nefret said finally. Yes, mother. Seneb, the nephew, is said to be kind. Hard-working. His pottery is of fine quality. It's a good match. Yes, mother. You don't sound pleased. Nefret set down her bread. I don't know him. Few girls know their husbands before betrothal. Your father and I met only twice before our families agreed on terms. Look how well that turned out. You and father are fortunate. Fortune favors the prepared. We made it work. We chose to make it work. Nefret nodded, but something in her expression troubled Nefret. The girl looked trapped, like a bird that had suddenly realized it was in a cage. What troubles you, daughter? For a moment, Nefret seemed about to speak. Then she shook her head. Nothing, mother. I'm tired, that's all. But Nefret knew her daughter better than that. She saw the intelligence in Nefret's eyes, the hunger for something the girl couldn't name. She saw herself, years ago, before she'd learned to channel everything into her loom, into her children, into the manageable shape of a good life. That evening, after Nakht returned home and the family had eaten, Nefret pulled him aside. Lady Satsobek came today. Her nephew wishes to court Nefret. Nakht's face showed surprise, then calculation. Seneb the potter. You know of him. His work, yes. He supplies storage jars to the temple. Good quality, reliable. Nakht paused. It's a solid match. Better than we might have expected. That's what I thought. Nefret hesitated. But Nefret seems uneasy. Uneasy how? I'm not sure. Reluctant. Frightened. I can't quite read her. Nakht was quiet for a long moment. Above them, the stars were emerging, the eternal patterns that guided boats on the Nile and souls through the afterlife. Somewhere in the city, a dog barked. A baby cried. Life continuing its ancient rhythms. The letter from Memphis, Nakht said finally. The Pyramid Project. I'm going to accept it. Nefret's breath caught. You've decided. Not entirely, but I'm leaning toward it. He turned to face her. If we stay here, I'll need to deal with the Amenemhat situation. That will make enemies. Powerful enemies. It could affect my position, our security, even Kimwasit's future prospects. And if we go north, Then we leave the politics behind. Fresh start. New opportunities. He paused. Different opportunities. For all of us. Nefret understood what he wasn't saying directly. In Memphis, far from Thebes and its settled patterns, there might be possibilities that didn't exist here. For their children. For Nefret. My business is here, she said quietly. My clients, my reputation, my students. You could rebuild. You're skilled enough to find work anywhere. And the pyramid project will need suppliers. Thousands of workers need clothing, bandages, household linens. You could establish yourself there. What about your mother? She's aging. Who would look after her? My brother is still in Thebes. His family could. Could, yes. But will? It was a fair question. Nakht's brother was a potter, not unsuccessful, but not particularly ambitious. Their mother lived in a small house near the river, getting by on what her sons could spare. We'd send money, Nakht said. Regular payments. She'd be provided for. Nefret closed her eyes. Her own mother had died 3 years ago, a mercy, in some ways, that she wouldn't have to be part of this decision. But she still felt the loss keenly, especially in moments like this when she needed wisdom that could only come from someone who'd lived longer, seen more. What about Nefret's betrothal? She asked. We tell Lady Satsobek's family that we're honored, but that we're relocating for my work. We apologize for the inconvenience. It's awkward, but not impossible. And then what happens to Nefret? 2 years from now, she'll be 18. If she's not betrothed by then we find her a husband in Memphis. Or she stays unmarried longer. It's not unheard of. It's unusual. Everything about this family is slightly unusual. Nakht's voice held a note of wry affection. We taught our daughter to read, Nefret. That moment defined everything that came after. Nefret thought of Nefret as a small child, arranging Kimwasit's practice shards in patterns, her little face scrunched in concentration. Thought of Nakht smiling indulgently, beginning to explain what the signs meant. Thought of herself watching, knowing even then that they were giving their daughter both a gift and a burden. Knowledge was power. But for a woman, it was also danger. The danger of seeing too clearly what might have been, what couldn't be. Tell me truly, Nefret said. This move to Memphis. Is it about your work, or is it about Nefret? Nakht was silent for a long time. Honest enough not to answer quickly. Both, he said finally. I won't lie to you. When I think about accepting this assignment, part of what I see is opportunity for her. Something beyond weaving and managing a household, however well she might do those things. But I also see it as the right choice for our family's security. For Kimwasit's education and future prospects. For our own advancement. And if it doesn't work out? If we uproot everything and it turns out there are no opportunities for Nefret? If she ends up unmarried at 20, considered strange, difficult to place? Then we'll deal with that when it happens. But I believe, that Egypt is changing. Senusret III is centralizing power, reforming administration, building monuments that will last forever. He needs capable people. In a system that's being rebuilt, there's room for new kinds of positions. For women scribes. Mereret's tone was skeptical. For women who can read and write and calculate. Call it what you will. Nefret looked up at the stars, the same stars that had wheeled overhead when the first pharaohs ruled, that would wheel overhead long after she was dust in a tomb. The universe was vast and indifferent. Humans could only control their small corners of it, and even that control was largely illusion. But still, they tried. They made choices. They hoped. We should discuss it with the children, she said. This affects them too. Yes. But Nefret, whatever we decide together. As a family. I won't drag you north if you're truly opposed. She took his hand, work-worn and ink-stained. I'm not opposed. I'm frightened. There's a difference. I know. They stood together under the stars, feeling the weight of the future pressing down like the sky itself, heavy with both threat and promise. Chapter 4. The Signs of Learning. The scribal school occupied a courtyard adjacent to the temple's house of life, the scriptorium where sacred texts were copied and preserved, where priests studied medicine and astronomy and magic. Kimwasit had been attending since he was 8 years old, and he knew every stone of the place. The courtyard was shaded by sycamore trees, their broad leaves filtering the morning sun into patterns of light and shadow. 24 boys sat cross-legged on reed mats, arranged by age and skill. The youngest were barely 8, still learning the basics of hieratic script. The oldest was 16, preparing to take positions in the vast administrative machinery of Egypt. Their teacher, Amenhotep, was a man of 40 with a stern face and patient eyes. He'd been teaching for 20 years and had seen hundreds of boys pass through his instruction, some brilliant, most competent, a few who never quite grasped the complexity of written language but whose families pushed them through anyway, hoping for the status that came with literacy. Right, Amenhotep commanded. The boys bent over their ostraca, pottery shards and limestone flakes, the cheap practice materials of scribal education. Reed brushes dipped into water pots, then into cakes of black ink, then moved across the white surfaces in the flowing signs of hieratic script. Kimwasit copied from a papyrus propped before him. Be a scribe. It saves you from toil and protects you from all manner of work. It spares you from hoe and mattock. You do not carry a basket. It separates you from the ore. The teaching of Keti, a text every scribe student memorized. It went on to describe the miseries of other professions, the farmer's toil, the fisherman's danger, the soldier's suffering, all to emphasize how fortunate scribes were to have escaped manual labor. Kimwasit had mixed feelings about the text. His mother was a weaver. Was her work less valuable than his father's record-keeping? His grandfather on his mother's side had been a skilled carpenter before entering scribal service. Had those years been wasted? But he knew better than to voice such questions. Teachers didn't appreciate students who questioned the wisdom texts. Beside him, his friend Tarms finished his copy quickly and sat back, surveying the courtyard with the casual confidence of someone who found learning easy. Tarms was the son of a temple treasurer, wealthy enough that his education was assured, skilled enough that he'd probably rise high in the administration. Your sister could write this better than you, Tarms whispered, grinning. Kimwasit's brush slipped, making an ink blot. He cursed under his breath and reached for his knife to scrape it away. What? He hissed. Your sister. Everyone knows she can read. My mother saw her at the market, reading a letter for someone who'd received it from family upriver. She read it perfectly, even the difficult signs. Kimwasit's face burned. It was true, Nefret could read as well as he could, maybe better. But it wasn't something to discuss openly. Girls didn't attend scribal school. Women weren't scribes. There were exceptions. Noble women sometimes learned, priestesses in certain cults, but a middle-class merchant's daughter who could read was unusual enough to attract attention. Attention was dangerous. Mind your own practice, Kimwasit muttered. But his concentration was broken. His signs became sloppy. Amenhotep noticed. Kimwasit, show me. He held up his ostracon reluctantly. Amenhotep studied it, frowning. This is careless work. The signs are uneven, the spacing poor. You're capable of better. Yes, teacher. Copy it again. And this time, think about what you're writing. The signs should reflect the scribe's mind, ordered, precise, beautiful. Sloppy writing reveals a sloppy mind. As Kimwasit began copying again, he heard snickering from across the courtyard. Rahotep, the overseer of work's son, whispered something to his neighbor. They both looked at Kimwasit and laughed. Kimwasit gritted his teeth and kept writing. Rahotep was everything Kimwasit wasn't: wealthy, confident, naturally talented, and cruel in the careless way of people who'd never faced consequences. His father's position made him untouchable. Teachers disciplined him gently, other students deferred to him, and he wore his privilege like fine linen, visible to everyone. The morning progressed through arithmetic. Amenhotep wrote problems on a large board. A granary contains 1,000 hecate of grain. Workers receive rations of 5 hecate per month. How many workers can be fed for how long? Kimwasit worked through the calculation on his ostrakon. Egyptian mathematics used unit fractions, everything expressed as divisions of 1. It made some calculations elegant, others awkward. You learned to think in terms of doubling and halving, of finding the right combinations of fractions to reach your answer. 1,000 divided by 5 equals 200. If there were, say, 50 workers, they could be fed for 4 months. He checked his work, satisfied. Amenhotep called on students randomly to give answers. Most got it right. When he called on Barkey, a younger boy whose father was a temple doorkeeper, the boy stumbled. I got 180. Show your work. Barkey held up his ostrakon. His calculation was muddled. He'd made an error in his fractions, carrying the wrong value forward. Here, Amenhotep said, not unkindly. You've confused the denominator. When you're dividing by 5, you're looking for the 5th part, which means. His father can't even count to 5, Rahotep said loudly. How do you expect him to understand fifths? Several boys laughed. Barkey's face crumpled. Silence. Amenhotep's voice cracked like a whip. The courtyard went still. Rahotep, stand. Rahotep rose, smirking slightly, unafraid. Recite the first maxim of Ptahhotep. Do not be proud of your knowledge, but discuss with the ignorant as with the wise. The limits of skill cannot be. Stop. You can recite, but you cannot practice. Barkey's father earns his bread honestly. Your father's position is no more noble than the doorkeeper's. It's simply different. We all serve Marat. We all serve Pharaoh. Remember that. Rahotep's smirk faded slightly, but his eyes hardened. He would remember this humiliation. So would Barkey, but for different reasons. The boy sat straighter, his expression grateful. After the lesson, as students gathered their materials, Tarms leaned toward Kimwasit. Your father's considering the Memphis assignment, isn't he? How do you know that? Everyone knows. The vizier's office sent letters to all the best scribes in Thebes. My father received one too, but is not going, he's too established here. But your father's younger, ambitious. It makes sense. We haven't decided yet. If you go, you should. It's a great opportunity. Working on a royal pyramid. That's the kind of thing that gets you noticed, that opens doors later. Kimwasit nodded, but his mind was churning. If they went to Memphis, everything would change. New school, new teachers, new students. He'd lose his friends here. He'd have to prove himself all over again. But he'd also escape Rahotep. And Nefret would escape. What? What was Nefret escaping? The question nagged at him as he walked home with his father that afternoon. They took the route along the Nile, where the breeze was cooler and the view open. Boats glided past, cargo vessels, fishing boats, pleasure craft for the wealthy. Father, Kimwasit asked suddenly, why did you teach Nefret to read? Nakht glanced at him, surprised. Why do you ask? Tarms says people talk about it. They think it's strange. People talk about many things. Most of it is idle wind. But why did you do it? Nakht was quiet for several steps. When your sister was small, perhaps 3 years old, she used to watch me work. Not play watching, real watching. Studying what I did. One day she brought me a piece of broken pottery and asked what the marks meant. I told her. The next day she brought me another one. And another. She was hungry for knowledge the way some children are hungry for sweets. So you taught her because she asked. I taught her because it seemed cruel not to. Knowledge isn't a finite resource, Kimwasit. My teaching her didn't take anything away from you. If anything, it's helped you. You've always had someone to practice with, someone to challenge you. But she's a girl. She is. And someday she'll be a woman. And she'll need to navigate a world that has very clear ideas about what women can and cannot do. But within that world, having knowledge is never a disadvantage. Even if she never uses it professionally, she can read contracts, manage accounts, help her husband in his work. She can teach her own children. Knowledge multiplies. They walked in silence for a while. The sun was lowering, painting the western cliffs in shades of amber and rose. Are we really going to Memphis? Kimwasit asked. Would you want to? I don't know. I'd miss my friends. But... He hesitated. It would be an adventure. Nakht smiled. Yes. It would be that. What about Nefret? What happens to her if we go? That, Nakht said slowly, is the question I've been trying to answer. When they reached home, they found Miret and Nefret on the rooftop, preparing the evening meal. The smell of baking bread wafted from the oven below. Onions sizzled in oil. Beer had been poured into cups. The family gathered as they did every evening, sitting together as the sun set and the city transformed from day to night, from the realm of the living to the threshold of the sacred dark. We need to talk, Nakht said, about the future. And so, as the stars emerged one by one, the family of the scribe Nakht began to decide which path to walk, whether to stay in the familiar or venture into the unknown, whether to accept the world as it was or try to bend it, however slightly, into new shapes. Chapter 5. The Festival of Amun. The temple festival began at sunset, as all sacred things began, in the liminal space between day and night, between the world of men and the world of gods. The family dressed in their finest clothing. Nakht wore a freshly laundered kilt, the pleats sharp, and draped a shawl of fine linen over his shoulders. Miret had woven the shawl herself, white with a subtle border of blue thread, the color of the heavens. She wore her best dress, a sheath of linen that fell from her shoulders to her ankles, held by two straps, belted at the waist with a woven sash. Her wig was carefully arranged, dressed with scented oil that smelled of myrrh and cassia. Nefret and Kimwasit wore similar finery, appropriate to their age and status. Middle-class respectability, not wealth, but prosperity. The kind of clothing that announced, we are people of skill and education, worthy of respect. They joined the crowd streaming toward the temple complex. Thebes transformed during festivals, the streets packed with people from every level of society, from nobles carried in sedan chairs to field workers walking barefoot. The distinctions of daily life blurred slightly during sacred times, when all of Egypt stood before the gods as supplicants. The temple gates stood open, flanked by massive stone pylons carved with images of Pharaoh Senusret III smiting Egypt's enemies, Nubians, Asiatics, Libyans, all the forces of chaos that threatened Marat. The images were propaganda, but they were also prayer. May the king protect us, may order prevail over disorder, may Egypt endure. Torches blazed along the walls. Incense smoke rose in thick clouds, carrying prayers to heaven. Musicians played, the thrum of harps, the rattle of sistrums, the deep boom of drums. Singers chanted hymns in voices trained to pierce the night. Amun-Ra, king of the gods, lord of heaven, you who made what is and created what exists, the sole one who made the many, from whose eyes mankind came forth, from whose mouth the gods were created. The outer courtyard was open to all. Here, people milled and celebrated, eating food distributed by the temple, bread, beer, roasted goose for this special occasion. Children ran between adults, laughing. Vendors sold amulets and charms. Holy men offered blessings for copper. But beyond the outer court lay the inner temple, where only priests could enter. The family pressed close to the gates, craning to see. Inside, barely visible through the incense smoke, priests performed the sacred rites. They purified themselves in the sacred lake, then processed toward the sanctuary where the god statue resided, hidden in darkness, wrapped in fine linen, seeing all. The statue would be fed, offerings of bread, beer, meat, vegetables, everything the god required. Then the food would be distributed to the priests, to the temple workers, to the people. The divine eating what was offered, then sharing it with humanity. The circle of reciprocity that sustained creation. Nakht felt the familiar awe that festivals always inspired. He was a practical man, trained in numbers and records, but he was also Egyptian. The gods were real. Ma'at was real. The cosmic order that balanced creation against chaos was as real as the Nile's inundation, as certain as death. Father, look. Kimwasit pointed toward the temple proper. A procession was emerging, priests in their finest robes, wearing masks of the gods. There was falcon-headed Horus, jackal-headed Anubis, ibis-headed Thoth. They moved with ritual precision, performing a sacred drama too ancient to have a known origin. The crowd pressed closer. Nakht kept his family close, aware of the density of bodies, the potential for accidents. He noticed Mereret's hand gripping Nefret's arm protectively. "Stay together," he said firmly. They found a place near the northern wall where they could see and breathe. Around them, Thebes celebrated, people singing, dancing, some already drunk on the free beer. Festival was release, a sanctioned breaking of daily routine, a time when joy was not just permitted but required. Nakht. He turned to find his colleague Jedi with a group of younger scribes, all slightly drunk, all grinning. "Join us. We're making offerings at the side shrine, then there's a feast in the scribal quarters." "I'm with my family," Nakht said. "Bring them. There's food for everyone tonight." Nakht glanced at Meret, who shook her head minutely. She preferred the main celebration, the proper observances. The scribal quarter feast would be rowdy, full of men drinking and boasting. Not appropriate for women and children, despite Jedi's invitation. "Perhaps later," Nakht said diplomatically. Jedi shrugged, unbothered, and rejoined his companions. They disappeared into the crowd, laughing. "You should go," Meret said quietly. "Build connections. I'll take the children home later." "I'm fine here." "Nakht, you're about to ask these people to manage your work while you're gone. You should maintain goodwill." She was right, as usual. Meret understood politics as well as any scribe, even if her sphere was domestic rather than professional. Perhaps especially because her sphere was domestic, she'd learned to read people, to navigate relationships, to build networks of obligation and reciprocity. "An hour," he conceded. "Then I'll come home. Stay as long as you need." He kissed her forehead, a gesture of affection unusual in public, but festival allowed it. Then he melted into the crowd, leaving his family to their own celebration. Meret led Nefret and Kimwasit deeper into the festival, toward the food distribution. They received portions of roasted goose, a rare luxury, along with bread and dates. They sat on the temple steps, eating and watching the spectacle. Kimwasit was enthralled by the masked priests, asking questions about the rituals. Meret answered what she could, explaining the mythology, the symbolism, the ancient stories encoded in every gesture. Nefret was quieter, watching everything with those two bright eyes. "What are you thinking?" Meret asked her daughter. "Just watching, mother." "You watch like you're trying to memorize everything. Isn't that what scribes do? Observe and record." "You're not a scribe." The words came out harsher than Meret intended. Nefret flinched. "I know, mother." Meret sighed, touching her daughter's hand. "I didn't mean. I just want you to enjoy the festival." Be here, now. Not always thinking about what comes next. Yes, mother. But Nefret could see that Nefret's mind was already elsewhere, always elsewhere, reaching for something just beyond her grasp. The night deepened. Musicians played more energetically. Dancing began, spontaneous, joyful, with people of all ages joining the circles. Kimwasit begged to join, and Nefret let him, watching her son lose himself in movement and music. She and Nefret sat together, mother and daughter, separated by a gap neither quite knew how to bridge. Lady Satsobek's nephew, Nefret said suddenly. Seneb. Do you think he's kind? I don't know him well. But his family is respected. That suggests good character. Would you want me to marry him? Nefret chose her words carefully. I want you to have a good life. Security, comfort, respect. A husband who treats you well. Children if the gods bless you. Seneb could provide those things. But would you want me to marry him? Nefret, I don't understand what you're asking. I'm asking if you think I should. If you were me, would you? Nefret looked at her daughter, 16 years old, on the threshold of womanhood, asking questions that had no simple answers. If I were you, knowing what I know now, I don't know. Marriage is, it's work. It's compromise. It's building something together, day by day. Your father and I, we're fortunate. We respect each other. But we also worked for that respect. It didn't come automatically with the marriage contract. Did you ever wish you'd done something else? Before marriage? The question cut close to old wounds. Sometimes. When I was young, I thought I might be a scribe, like my father. I could read and write as well as any boy. But that's not how Egypt works. So I learned weaving instead, and I'm good at it. I've built something. I have pride in my work. But you still wonder. Sometimes. Less as I've gotten older. Life is what it is, daughter. We make the best of what we're given. What if we could be given more? Nefret turned to face Nefret fully. What are you saying? Father's considering Memphis. I know you've been discussing it. If we went there, would things be different? Could I be different? You can be yourself anywhere, Nefret. Can I? Can I really? Before Nefret could answer, a commotion arose near the main gate. Voices raised, not in celebration but in argument. The crowd shifted, people craning to see. Stay here, Nefret commanded, rising. But Nefret followed, and Nefret didn't have the heart to stop her. They pushed through the crowd toward the disturbance. Two men faced each other in the torchlight. One was an older priest, the other a young man Nefret didn't recognize. The young man wore the white robes of a junior priest, but his bearing suggested education beyond his years. Irresponsible to make such claims without evidence, the older priest was saying. I have evidence. The astronomical observations don't match the temple records. Someone has been falsifying the sacred calendar. Gasps from the crowd. The sacred calendar governed everything: festivals, planting seasons, religious observances. It was calculated by priest astronomers who studied the stars, who understood the movements of celestial bodies. To falsify it would be to undermine Ma'at itself. You dare accuse the temple administration of? I accuse no one. I simply present what I've observed. The heliacal rising of Sirius this year occurred 2 days later than recorded. Either our instruments are wrong, our observations are wrong, or you're a presumptuous young fool who mistakes his limited understanding for wisdom. The crowd murmured, divided. Some supported the older priest's authority. Others were intrigued by the young man's boldness. Nefret studied the young priest. He was perhaps 22, with an intelligent face and eyes that burned with certainty. She'd seen that look before, In her father's face when he argued about administrative reforms, in Nakht's face when he defended some principle, in Nefret's face when she asked questions that had no comfortable answers. The look of someone who valued truth over safety. "Who is he?" Nefret whispered. "I don't know." But she noticed how her daughter watched the young priest, how Nefret leaned forward, listening to every word of the argument. The confrontation was interrupted by a senior priest, older, more diplomatic. He ushered both men away from the crowd, speaking in low, soothing tones. The immediate drama ended, but the crowd buzzed with speculation. Nefret guided Nefret back to where Kimwasit waited, eyes wide with excitement. "Did you see? That priest challenged the whole temple administration." "He was drunk," Nefret said firmly. "Or foolish. Or both. Don't romanticize it. But what if he was right? Then he should have presented his concerns through proper channels, not during a public festival. Wisdom includes knowing when and how to speak." But even as she said it, Nefret wondered. How many truths went unspoken because the proper channels led nowhere? How many reforms died because speaking out of turn was considered worse than staying silent about injustice? They collected Nakht an hour later from the scribal feast. He was mildly drunk, happy, his face flushed with beer and camaraderie. He'd clearly enjoyed himself, building the goodwill Nefret had advised. The family walked home through streets still alive with celebration. Torches burned. Music drifted from houses and beer shops. Thebes would celebrate through the night. But in their house, exhaustion claimed them quickly. Kimwasit fell asleep almost immediately. Nefret and Nakht lay on their sleeping mat, listening to the distant drums. "Amenhotep asked me about Memphis," Nakht said into the darkness. "The overseer of scribes. Everyone's talking about it." "What did you tell him?" "That I'm considering it. He said I'd be a fool not to go." "And do you think you'd be a fool?" Nakht rolled to face her, though in the darkness she could barely see his features. "I think I'd be a fool either way. If we stay, we miss an opportunity. If we go, we risk everything on uncertainty. Then we must decide which folly we can live with." He laughed quietly. "You make it sound simple." "It's not simple. But it is binary. We stay or we go. Everything else is speculation. What does your heart say?" Nefret thought of Nefret's face watching the young priest, bright with attention and hunger. Thought of her own young self, reading beside her father, before she understood that some doors were closed regardless of skill. Thought of the life she'd built, good, meaningful, but always with that whisper of what if echoing in quiet moments. "My heart says we should go," she whispered. "But my mind is terrified." "Then we're matched. My mind says go, but my heart fears leaving everything we know. Perhaps that's why we make a good pair. Between us, we have one complete opinion." Nakht pulled her close, and they lay together, listening to the festival drums, feeling the solid earth beneath them and the uncertain future pressing down like the weight of sky, heavy with stars and possibility. Chapter 6. The Journey Upriver. 3 days after the festival, Nakht stood on the deck of a temple boat heading south, watching Thebes recede behind him. The city he'd lived in his entire life grew smaller, its massive temple shrinking to a landmark, then to a memory. Jedi stood beside him, young and nervous about managing the granary accounts during Nakht's absence. They'd spent the previous 2 days in intense instruction, reviewing procedures, discussing potential complications. "You'll be fine," Nakht said, though he wasn't entirely certain. "I hope so." The boat captain called orders. Sailors adjusted the single large sail to catch the north wind. The current fought them. The Nile always flowed north, but the wind blew south, a gift from the gods that made upstream travel possible. To go south, you sailed. To go north, you drifted. The geography of Egypt shaped everything. The boat was a cargo vessel typically used for grain transport, But today it carried a different cargo. Nakht and 2 junior scribes, traveling to Amenemhat's estate to conduct the investigation Nakht had promised. The investigation that might end his career or establish his reputation, depending on what they found. The river journey would take 5 days. 5 days to watch Upper Egypt slide past, fields green with young crops, villages of mud brick houses, temples and shrines marking holy places, the eternal desert cliffs framing the fertile strip, the division between life and death visible in a single glance. Nakht had brought scrolls to study, records to review, but mostly he watched the river and thought. He thought about the family council 3 nights ago, when they'd gathered on the rooftop to discuss Memphis. He'd presented the options clearly, as he would present a case to a superior. Stay in Thebes with known security, or accept the pyramid assignment with unknown potential. Kimwasit had voted enthusiastically to go. "It's a royal project, Father. We'd be working directly for Pharaoh." Nefret had been more measured. "I'm willing to try. My business can be rebuilt. But we must be realistic about the risks." Nefret had surprised them all. "I want to go. But I'm frightened." It was the most honest thing any of them had said. In the end, they'd reached consensus. They would accept the Memphis assignment. They would leave Thebes. They would leap into uncertainty together. Nakht had sent his acceptance to the vizier's office the next morning. The reply had come within hours. He was to report to Dasha immediately after the inundation, in 3 months' time. That gave them time to settle affairs, pack, prepare. It also gave them time to doubt. But first, Nakht had to resolve the Amenemhat situation. He couldn't leave this hanging, couldn't pass a corrupt official's actions to Jedi to handle. If Amenemhat was stealing temple grain, it needed to be addressed. Marat demanded it, even if addressing it was dangerous. The first night, they stopped at a riverside village. The boat captain knew the headman, and they were offered hospitality, simple food, beer, sleeping space on reed mats. Nakht lay awake, listening to the river's eternal murmur, feeling the weight of decisions made and yet to be made. One of the junior scribes, Amenhotep, young and eager, approached him in the morning. "Chief, may I ask a question?" "Of course." "Why are we doing this?" "Investigating Amenemhat, I mean. If you're leaving for Memphis anyway, why risk making enemies? You'll be gone. It won't be your problem." Nakht considered the question carefully. "If I walk away from this, if I record false numbers because it's convenient, what am I? I'm a scribe who betrayed his oath. That stain doesn't wash away when you change cities. It stays with you. It becomes who you are. But no one would know. I would know. The gods would know. Marat would know." Amenhotep nodded slowly, not entirely convinced but willing to accept the answer. They sailed on. The river narrowed in places, broadened in others. They passed cargo vessels heading north, laden with grain and goods from Upper Egypt. They passed fishing boats, papyrus rafts, pleasure craft carrying nobles. The Nile was Egypt's highway, its lifeblood, its gift from the gods. On the 3rd day, they reached the nome where Amenemhat's estate lay. The boat docked at a small port, and they hired donkeys for the short journey inland. The estate sprawled across several thousand aruras of land, fields of emmer wheat and barley, orchards of dates and figs, vegetable gardens, fish ponds, cattle pens. Dozens of workers moved through the fields, bent to their eternal labor. Overseers walked among them, checking progress, maintaining order. It was a miniature kingdom, all managed for the benefit of Amun's temple in Thebes. The main house was substantial, mud brick walls whitewashed, multiple rooms, a large courtyard. Amenemhat was clearly prosperous, far beyond what an overseer's salary should provide. That alone wasn't proof of corruption. He might have family wealth, successful side ventures. But it was suggestive. Amenemhat himself came out to greet them, all courtesy and smooth hospitality. He was perhaps 45, well-fed, wearing fine linen and gold jewelry that flashed in the sunlight. Nakht. What an unexpected pleasure. You should have sent word. I would have prepared a proper welcome. This isn't a social visit, Nakht said quietly. I'm here to inspect the harvest records and resolve the discrepancy in your latest shipment. Amenemhat's smile didn't waver, but something shifted behind his eyes. Of course. Though I must say, this seems like considerable effort for what's likely a simple accounting error. Perhaps the fault lies in the temple's expectations rather than my estate's production. Perhaps. Let's examine the evidence. They spent 2 days reviewing records. Amenemhat's estate manager, a nervous man named Seneb, produced papyrus scrolls documenting field measurements, planting records, expected yields, actual harvests, grain stored, grain shipped. On the surface, everything appeared in order. The numbers matched. The calculations were correct. But Nakht had been doing this work for 18 years. He knew how to read not just what was written but what was absent. "Show me the field-by-field records," he said. "Those are somewhere. Perhaps in the storage room. It might take time to find them." "We have time." It took a full day of searching, too long, suspiciously long, before the detailed records appeared. And there, in the specifics, Nakht found the pattern. Certain fields showed dramatically reduced yields, year after year, despite no apparent change in conditions. Those fields happened to be the ones farthest from the main house, hardest to supervise directly. And the shortfalls always came at harvest time, never at planting or growth assessments. Someone was skimming grain after harvest, but before it reached the boats. Not massive amounts, 5 to 8% of the total. Enough to be valuable, not so much as to be obvious. These fields here, Nakht pointed to the papyrus. Why such poor yields? Disease, perhaps. Poor soil. Insufficient water. But the fields adjacent to them, same conditions, produced normal yields. Agriculture is unpredictable. Not this unpredictable. Not this consistently. Amenemhat's facade cracked slightly. His smile became harder. "Nakht, let me speak plainly. You're a competent administrator. I respect that. But you're also a practical man with a family to support. These inconsistencies, they're the way things work in the real world. Temple quotas are often unrealistic. I adjust them to reflect reality. The temple still gets most of what it needs. Everyone benefits. Except Marat. Marat is a pretty concept. But we live in the actual world, where officials must navigate between ideals and survival. Where does the grain go? The grain you skim. I don't. Don't insult me. Where does it go? Amenemhat was silent for a long moment. Then he sighed. Private sales. To merchants, households. The money supplements my income. I use it to maintain this estate properly, to pay my workers fair wages, to make offerings at the local temple. I'm not hoarding wealth. I'm redistributing it in ways the bureaucracy doesn't understand. You're stealing from the gods. I'm surviving in a system that pays overseers barely enough while expecting perfection. You want corruption? Look at the nomarch's household, at the priests who sell temple supplies, at the military officers who shortchange soldiers' rations. I'm small compared to them. That's not a defense. No. It's context. Nakht looked at Amenemhat, not an evil man, not a monster, just someone who'd made the choice many made, to prioritize personal security over abstract justice. A choice Nakht understood, even as he rejected it. You have 2 options, Nakht said finally. First, you make full restitution to the temple. Every hecat you've skimmed over the past 3 years, with interest. You resign your position. I file a report describing miscalculations that have been corrected, without naming you personally as corrupt. Your reputation takes a minor hit, but you're not ruined. And the second option. I file a full report detailing the theft. You're removed immediately, probably prosecuted. Your brother-in-law's political connections might save you from severe punishment, but your career is over. Your reputation is destroyed. Those are not generous options. They're the options Marat allows. Choose. Amenemhat stood, pacing the room. Outside, workers sang as they harvested, their voices carrying the rhythm of labor older than the pyramids. Finally, he turned back. How much restitution? Nakht consulted his calculations. 400 hecate of emmer wheat, 200 of barley. Approximately 200 deben of copper in value. You have 30 days to deliver it to the temple granary. That's significant. Yes, but survivable. You'll recover, and you'll have learned a lesson. Will I? Or have I learned that the only people who get caught are those without powerful enough friends? It was a fair point. Nakht had no answer for it. They returned to Thebes 4 days later. Nakht filed his report with careful wording, true but not inflammatory. Harvest assessment discrepancies have been identified and corrected. Full restitution will be made within 30 days. The overseer has resigned his position to pursue other opportunities. Nefret, the overseer of scribes, read the report and met Nakht's eyes. Diplomatically handled. I preserved Marat as best I could within political reality. That's the eternal balance, isn't it? Justice and pragmatism. You did well, Nakht. This is noted in your record. But as Nakht left the office, he felt no triumph. He'd caught a petty thief while larger corruption went unaddressed. He'd compromised his absolute principles to achieve a partial victory. He'd learned that in the real world, perfect justice was rare. Perhaps Memphis would be different. Perhaps not. But at least it would be new. Chapter 7. The Potter's Son. The formal proposal came 2 weeks after Nakht's return from the investigation. Seneb's father, a master potter named Jehuti, confusingly, many shared names in Egypt, arrived with gifts, a magnificent storage jar decorated with lotus patterns, a set of smaller vessels for cosmetics, copper rings, and a bolt of fine linen. For your household, Jehuti said, with hopes that our families might be united. The traditional words. The ancient ritual. Nakht and Nefret received him with appropriate courtesy, serving beer and dates, making small talk about the weather, the harvest, the health of mutual acquaintances. Finally, they reached the point. Your son Seneb wishes to court our daughter Nefret. With your permission. He saw her at the festival. He's been asking about her since. I've made inquiries. Your family is respected. Your daughter is skilled and educated. It would be a good match. Nakht glanced at Nefret. They discussed this, planned what to say. But now, facing the actual moment, the words felt heavy. Seneb is a fine young man, Nakht said carefully. Your family is esteemed. But our situation has changed recently. I've accepted an assignment with the Royal Pyramid Project at Dasha. We'll be relocating to Memphis. Jehuti's face showed surprise, then disappointment, then calculation. For how long? 2 years, possibly more. I see. That is unfortunate timing. Indeed. We're honored by your proposal, truly. But it seems impractical to arrange a betrothal when we'll be so far away. Unless, Jehuti said slowly, the betrothal happens before you leave. Seneb and Nefret could marry within the month. She would stay here, manage a household, wait for your return. It's not uncommon for families to be separated by work obligations. The suggestion hung in the air. It was reasonable. It was practical. It was exactly what Nakht had hoped to avoid. May we have time to discuss this as a family? Nefret asked. Of course. Take 3 days. But I must be honest, Seneb has received interest from other families. If your daughter isn't available, he'll consider other options. A polite threat. A gentle pressure. The implication clear. Delay too long, and the opportunity vanishes. After Jehuti left, Nakht and Nefret sat in heavy silence. The gifts remained on the table, beautiful and problematic. "We have to tell her," Nefret said finally. They called Nefret from her weaving. She came quickly, reading tension in their faces. "Seneb's father was here," Nakht said. "He's made a formal proposal. He's asked for an answer in 3 days." Nefret's hands twisted in her dress. "What did you tell him?" "That we're moving to Memphis. But he suggests marriage before we leave. You would stay here while we're gone, manage Seneb's household." "What do you want me to do?" Nefret's voice was barely above a whisper. "What do you want to do?" Nakht asked. "I don't know." Nefret moved closer to her daughter. "Nefret, you need to think seriously about this. Seneb is a good match. If you refuse now, when we return in 2 years, you'll be 18. The good proposals might be gone. You might end up with fewer choices, worse options." "I know." "So, can I meet him, Seneb, before deciding?" Nakht and Nefret exchanged glances. It was an unusual request. Most betrothals were arranged by families with minimal input from the couple. But it wasn't impossible. "I'll arrange it," Nakht said. 2 days later, Seneb came to their house. He was 22, tall and well-built from years of working clay, with strong hands and an open face. Not handsome exactly, but pleasant-looking. He brought a small vessel he'd made, a drinking cup with a simple but elegant form. "I made this for you," he told Nefret, offering it shyly. "If you don't like it, I can make another. Different shape, different size, whatever you prefer." Nefret took the cup, turning it in her hands. The clay was smooth, perfectly balanced. The rim was even. The base sat flat. It was the work of someone who cared about details, who took pride in getting things right. "It's beautiful," she said. "Thank you." They sat on the rooftop, chaperoned by Nefret but given space to talk. Nakht watched from below, pretending to review accounts but listening. "Your father tells me you can read," Seneb said. Nefret tensed. "Yes." "That's remarkable. I never learned. My father tried to send me to scribe school when I was young, but I wasn't any good at it. Too restless, I think. But I always admired people who could." "You don't think it's strange? For a woman?" "Strange. Maybe unusual. But not bad. My mother keeps all the accounts for our pottery business. She can't read, but she has a perfect memory for numbers, for who owes what. Intelligence finds its expression however it can." They talked for an hour. About pottery, about weaving, about families and expectations, and the strange dance of becoming adults in a world that had clear ideas about who they should be. When Seneb left, Nefret seemed thoughtful. "His kind." "Yes," Nefret said. "He is. His sincere. Also true. But I don't love him." Nefret sighed. "Love is built, Nefret. It doesn't appear fully formed like Ra emerging from the primordial waters. It's created through shared experience, through choosing each other day after day." "Did you love father when you married him?" "I barely knew him. But I chose to love him, and he chose to love me, and we built something real. What if I can't build that with Seneb? What if you can?" Nefret was quiet for a long time. I think I want to go to Memphis. I think I want to see what else is possible. Even if it's frightening. Even if it means turning down a good man, a safe choice. I think I need to know." Nefret felt something break open in her chest, Pride and fear mingled so thoroughly she couldn't separate them. Then that's what we'll tell his father. You're not angry. I'm terrified. But I understand. When Jehuti returned for their answer, Nakht delivered it with regret and respect. We're honored by your proposal. Seneb is an admirable young man. But our daughter prefers to accompany us to Memphis. We cannot in good conscience betroth her to a marriage she enters with doubt. Jehuti's face showed disappointment, but also a measure of respect. She has courage, your daughter. Perhaps too much for her own good. I hope Memphis proves worthy of it. After he left, Nakht held the pottery cup Seneb had made. It was beautiful, simple, functional, perfect for its purpose. A good cup made by a good man for a life that would have been good. But goodness wasn't always enough. Sometimes you had to reach for more, even if you risked everything. Especially then. Chapter 8. Departure. The 3 months before departure passed in a blur of preparation and farewells. Nefret trained her 2 apprentices to continue the weaving business in her absence, teaching them the complex patterns that wealthy clients preferred. She visited Lady Satsobek to explain the situation, expecting anger, but finding instead grudging respect. Your husband must be quite skilled to be selected for a royal project, the lady said. And your daughter must be quite unusual to choose uncertainty over security. I'm not sure if that's wisdom or foolishness, but it's interesting. Nefret sold some household goods, packed others. The logistics of moving a family across hundreds of miles were daunting. What to take? What to leave? What to sell? Everything had weight, both physical and emotional. A clay lamp her mother had used. Keep or sell? A wooden chest Nakht's father had made. Keep or sell? The small loom where Nefret had learned to weave as a child. Keep or sell? Each object was a memory, a tether to the life they were leaving. Each decision was a small grief. Nakht transferred his responsibilities to Jedi, spending long hours ensuring his replacement understood every detail of the granary accounts. He wrote letters of introduction to colleagues in Memphis, activating old connections, building new ones. He settled debts, made final offerings at the temple, visited his mother. His mother was 70, ancient by Egyptian standards. She lived in a small house near the river with Nakht's brother's family. When Nakht told her about Memphis, she simply nodded. Your father would be proud. He always said you'd rise high. I'm not rising. I'm just moving. Same thing, sometimes. She touched his face with gnarled hands. Don't forget where you come from. Don't forget who you are. I won't. And Nefret. That girl has her grandfather's mind. Sharp as bronze, bright as gold. Don't let the world dull it. I'm trying not to. Try harder. Kimwasit said goodbye to his friends at the scribe school. Tarms gave him a parting gift, a small wooden pallet, student-grade but well-made. For when you're writing for Pharaoh, Tarms said with a grin. I won't forget you. You'll meet new people. You'll forget. I won't. But Kimwasit wondered if that was true. How long before Thebes became just a memory? How long before these friendships faded like old ink exposed to sun? Nefret spent her last weeks weaving furiously, completing every commission, leaving no obligations unmet. Her fingers flew across the loom with desperate energy, as if she could weave herself into the fabric of Thebes, leave something of herself behind. On her last day, she walked to the river alone. Stood on the bank watching the eternal flow north. Somewhere, far downstream, lay Memphis, Dasher, the unknown future. Behind her, Thebes rose, the great temple, the city walls, the houses and shops and workshops where she'd spent every day of her 16 years. Home. Prison. Both. She bent, scooped up a handful of Nile mud, rich, black, life-giving. Let it squeeze through her fingers, watched it fall back to earth. This mud had built every house, every temple, every tomb. This mud was Egypt itself. She wiped her hands on her dress and turned away from the river. From everything she knew, toward everything she didn't. The morning of departure arrived too soon and not soon enough. The family stood in their house, now stripped of most possessions, echoing and strange. Walls that had held their laughter and arguments and daily routines for 18 years now held only emptiness. Nefret wept quietly. Nakht held her, his own eyes suspiciously bright. Kimwasit tried to be brave, but his chin trembled. Nefret stood apart, her face unreadable, locked in some internal struggle. "It's time," Nakht said finally. They locked the door, gave the key to Nakht's brother, who would rent it out, maintain it, keep their claim until they returned. If they returned. The journey north took 12 days. They traveled by boat, a cargo vessel heading to Memphis with goods from Upper Egypt. Nakht had arranged passage, paying in copper and favors. The boat was crowded, uncomfortable, but functional. The family claimed space on the deck, spreading reed mats, creating a small territory among the other passengers and cargo. The first day, Thebes slipped away behind them. The great temple shrinking, the familiar landmarks vanishing. Nefret stood at the stern, watching until the city disappeared entirely. Then she turned forward, toward the north, and didn't look back again. They drifted with the current. The river carried them past villages and estates, temples and tombs, fields and desert. The geography of Egypt unrolled like a papyrus scroll, narrow in some places, broad in others, but always the same pattern: green strip of life, red desert of death, repeated endlessly. At night, they tied up along the bank. The boat captain didn't like traveling in darkness. Too many sandbars, too many obstacles. They would cook simple meals, sleep under the stars, wake at dawn and continue north. Kimwasit was excited by the journey, asking constant questions. How far to Memphis? How many boats are on the river? What's that bird? That temple? That boat? Nakht answered patiently, turning the journey into education. That temple is dedicated to Atha. That bird is a sacred ibis. That boat is carrying grain from the estates of. Nefret was quieter, watching everything with intense attention. She'd brought a small bag of pottery shards, and occasionally, when she thought no one was looking, she would write on them. Observations. Thoughts. Her own private record of the journey. On the 5th day, they passed the great temple complex at Abydos, ancient burial ground of kings, most sacred site in all Egypt. The boat slowed so passengers could make offerings. The family stood at the rail, speaking prayers for safe passage, for successful futures, for the blessing of the gods. On the 7th day, they reached the point where the river split, one branch flowing northwest toward the delta and the sea, the other continuing north to Memphis. The junction was marked by a massive statue of a pharaoh whose name had been forgotten, eroded by centuries of floodwater. "Nothing lasts forever," Nefret said softly. "Stone lasts," Nakht replied. "That statue has stood for hundreds of years. But no one remembers who it represents. Is that lasting? Memory lasts as long as someone remembers. That's why scribes keep records. Why names are carved in stone. We fight against forgetting. Do we win? Sometimes. For a while." On the 10th day, they saw the pyramids. First, distant shapes on the horizon, geometric forms that didn't belong to nature. Then, closer, resolving into the massive monuments of earlier dynasties. The step pyramid of Djoser at Saqqara, the bent pyramid, the red pyramid, and in the distance, the 3 great pyramids of Giza, already ancient when Nakht's grandparents were young. Kimwasit's eyes widened. They're enormous. They were meant to be. Symbols of Pharaoh's power, staircases to the stars, eternal homes for divine kings. Will we build something that big? Senusret III's pyramid at Dashur is smaller than those, but still impressive. You'll see. On the 12th day, they reached Memphis, the capital of Egypt, greatest city of the two lands, home to the royal palace, the administrative center of the kingdom, the heart of political power. It was larger than Thebes, more crowded, more chaotic. The docks teemed with activity, boats from every part of Egypt and beyond, cargo being loaded and unloaded, merchants shouting, officials inspecting goods, the organized chaos of empire. The family disembarked into noise and confusion. Nakht had to show his official papers 3 times before they were allowed past the dock officials. Then they had to find transport to Dasha, several miles south of the city proper, where the pyramid complex was rising. They hired an ox cart, loading their possessions. The driver was an old man who'd been hauling goods to the pyramids for 30 years. Working on the royal tomb, are you? I'm a scribe, assigned to the supply administration. Ah, the men who make sure we all get fed and paid. Important work. Without you, the whole thing stops. Thousands of workers, all needing bread and beer and onions and tools and clothing and everything else. Logistics nightmare, it is. That's why they need skilled administrators. That's why they need patient administrators. You'll see. They traveled south along the desert edge, past other pyramids, monuments to dead kings, their glory faded but their stones eternal. Past workers' villages, quarries, supply depots. And then, rising from the desert plateau, white limestone gleaming in the afternoon sun, Nefret Threes Pyramid. It wasn't finished yet. The core structure was complete, but workers were still applying the outer casing stones, the pure white Tura limestone that would make it shine like a star when complete. Scaffolding clung to the sides. Ramps led to the upper levels. Thousands of men swarmed over it like ants on a grain heap. The noise was tremendous. Stone hammers striking stone, wooden sledges scraping over sand, overseers shouting orders, workers singing work songs to coordinate their efforts. The organized chaos of monumental construction. That's what you'll be part of, the cart driver said. Madness, glory, and back-breaking work. Welcome to Dasha. The family stared at the pyramid, at the massive project that would consume the next years of their lives. It was terrifying. It was inspiring. It was utterly Egyptian, the human drive to build something eternal, to leave a mark that would outlast flesh and memory and time itself. We're really here, Kimwasit breathed. We're really here, Nakht confirmed. The driver took them to the scribe's quarter, a section of the workers' village set aside for administrative personnel. The houses were smaller than their Thebes home, more crowded together, but functional. Mud brick walls, flat roofs, small courtyards. Their assigned house was at the end of a row. 2 rooms plus a rooftop workspace. Modest but adequate. The previous occupant had left some furniture, a few stools, a work table, sleeping mats. They set down their belongings in the empty house. Stood in the unfamiliar space. Felt the weight of what they'd done. This is home now, Nefret said, voice shaking slightly. This is home now, Nakht agreed. Nefret moved to the window, looking out at the pyramid dominating the horizon. Her face was unreadable. Fear, excitement, determination, doubt, all mixed together. What happens now? She asked. Now, Nakht said, we begin. Chapter 9. The House of Life. Nakht reported for duty the morning after their arrival, leaving his family to settle into the new house. The administrative complex was a sprawl of buildings adjacent to the pyramid temple, offices for overseers, workshops for craftsmen, storerooms for supplies, barracks for guards, and at the center, the House of Life. The Parank, the sacred scriptorium where priests copied religious texts, recorded royal decrees, studied medicine and astronomy and architecture. Every major temple had one, but the House of Life at Dasha was particularly active, serving both the pyramid project and the broader royal administration. The overseer of works, a stern man named Intef, reviewed Nakht's credentials and assignment. Supply logistics for the workers' village. You'll manage ration distributions, bread, beer, vegetables, oil, clothing, tools. 4,000 men and their families depend on this system functioning perfectly. Any disruption means work stoppage. Any corruption means investigation. Clear. Clear. You'll have 3 assistant scribes, all competent but young. Train them properly. I'll review your accounts monthly. Questions. Where do supplies come from? Everywhere. Royal estates throughout Egypt send quotas. We also have direct contracts with local farmers, brewers, bakers, weavers. You'll manage those contracts, verify deliveries, resolve disputes. It's complex work. I'm familiar with temple logistics. This seems similar but larger scale. Similar in principle, more complicated in practice. Temple workers are professionals, mostly permanent. Here, we have specialists working alongside temporary laborers, skilled artisans alongside farmers fulfilling labor obligations. Everyone gets different rations, different pay, different privileges. You'll need to track it all. Intef walked him through the storerooms, massive granaries, beer cellars, oil magazines, tool repositories, cloth warehouses. The organizational system was sophisticated but different from the Thebes temple. Nakht made mental notes of what he'd need to learn, what he could adapt from his previous experience. One more thing, Intef said as they returned to the office. Your family. Wife and 2 children. Yes. The priest Keti requested permission to speak with your daughter. Nakht's heart skipped. Why? Something about copying texts. He saw her name on your family registration, noted she can read. Unusual for a woman. My father taught her. She's quite skilled. Well, Keti's always looking for copyists. Medical texts, mostly. Women aren't usually employed in the House of Life, but for copying work, especially medical material, it's not unprecedented. If you're interested, speak to him. After Intef left, Nakht stood alone in his new office, processing this information. They'd been in Dasha for less than a day, and already the opportunity he'd hoped for, vaguely, uncertainly, was presenting itself. Perhaps Memphis was different after all. He finished his initial orientation, then walked to the House of Life. The building was beautiful, white limestone columns, a courtyard with a reflecting pool, walls covered in hieroglyphic texts. Scholars and priests moved through the space with quiet purpose. Nakht asked for Keti and was directed to a room filled with scrolls. A young priest sat at a desk, copying text from one papyrus to another, his handwriting precise and elegant. He looked up as Nakht entered. Mid-20s, intelligent eyes, ink-stained fingers. Something about him was familiar. You're Keti? Yes. And you're Nakht, the new supply administrator. I heard you arrived yesterday. How did you know about my daughter? I review all new registrations. When I saw a woman listed as literate, I was curious. Women who can read are rare. Women who can read well enough to list it officially are rarer. Is she actually skilled, or was that paternal optimism? She's genuinely skilled. She's been reading since she was 8. Interesting. Could she read this? Keti held up a papyrus covered in hieratic script, a medical text describing treatments for wounds. Nakht scanned it. Easily. She reads faster than I do, frankly. Better retention, too. Then I'd like to offer her work. I'm copying medical texts, updating older papyri, creating fresh copies for the Royal Library. It's tedious work, requires absolute accuracy. I need help. Most scribes available here are busy with construction logistics. But copying medical texts. He paused. There's precedent for women doing this. Medical knowledge passes through women, midwives, healers. Having a literate woman copy these texts isn't scandalous. What would the arrangement be? She'd work here, in the House of Life, under my supervision. 3 or 4 hours a day, whatever her schedule allows. I'd pay in copper, not much, but fair compensation. And she'd learn. I'm studying medicine, astronomy, mathematics. I teach as I work. If she's curious, she'd benefit. Nakht studied Ketty carefully. Why are you offering this? Honestly, because I need help and she's available. But also, he gestured to the scrolls surrounding them. Knowledge is sacred. Thoth doesn't care about gender. He cares about wisdom, accuracy, understanding. If your daughter can contribute to preserving and transmitting knowledge, why shouldn't she? It was an idealistic answer, perhaps naive. But Nakht found himself wanting to believe it. I'll discuss it with her. If she's interested, when could she start? Whenever she's ready. Nakht walked home through the workers' village, past the organized chaos of construction. Thousands of men hauling stones, mixing mortar, checking measurements, coordinating efforts. The sound was tremendous, but underneath it was a rhythm, the rhythm of collective human labor directed toward a singular goal. To build something eternal. To defy death. To bridge earth and heaven. At home, he found his family had made progress. Nefret had organized the small house with remarkable efficiency, finding places for everything they'd brought. Kimwasit was on the roof, watching the pyramid work with fascinated eyes. Nefret was in the courtyard, unpacking her weaving tools. How was it? Nefret asked. Complicated, but manageable. He paused. Nefret, I need to talk to you. He explained Ketty's offer. Watched his daughter's face as he spoke, saw shock, disbelief, hope, fear, all flickering across her features. He wants me to copy medical texts. Yes. In the House of Life. Under supervision, officially sanctioned. It's real work, Nefret. Real opportunity. Why? Because you're skilled. Because knowledge needs preserving. Because maybe, just maybe, Egypt is big enough for something unusual. Nefret sat down slowly, as if her legs couldn't hold her. I could study. Learn. Really. If you want to. Of course I want to. I never thought. She looked at her parents, tears streaming down her face. Is this real? It's real, Nefret said softly. We moved our entire lives so you could have this chance. Don't waste it. I won't. I promise I won't. That evening, the family stood on their rooftop, looking at the pyramid silhouetted against the sunset. The white limestone caught the last light, glowing like a beacon. We did it, Kimwasit said. We're really here. We really did it. We did, Nakht agreed. What if it doesn't work out? Nefret asked quietly. What if I fail? Then you fail, Nefret said. But you'll fail trying. That's different from never trying at all. Is it? Yes. Because even failure teaches something. Even mistakes have value. They stood together, a family from Thebes in the shadow of a pyramid, having gambled everything on possibility. The future was uncertain. The risks were real. But they were together. And they were trying. And sometimes, that was enough. Epilogue. 6 months later. The morning sun rose over Dasha, painting the pyramid's white limestone casing in shades of gold and rose. From the rooftop of their small house, Nefret watched the transformation, stone becoming light, becoming something almost divine. 6 months. Half a year since they'd left Thebes. Sometimes it felt like yesterday. Sometimes it felt like a lifetime. She heard her family stirring below. Her mother preparing breakfast, her father organizing his work materials, her brother practicing his signs. The familiar rhythms of daily life, transplanted to unfamiliar soil, taking root. Nefret descended from the roof, greeting her family with the morning blessing. They ate together, bread and dates, beer and onions. Simple food, but together. Always together. Big day, Ketty had told her yesterday. We finished the wound treatment text today. Your copy is beautiful work, Nefret. Better than many professional scribes I know. The words had filled her with pride so fierce it frightened her. 6 months of copying medical texts, astronomical observations, mathematical calculations. 6 months of learning not just to reproduce signs but to understand them. Ketty taught as much as he supervised, explaining the meanings, the theories, the centuries of accumulated wisdom encoded in reed brush marks. Her hands were perpetually ink-stained now. Her eyes sometimes ached from the close work. Her mind felt stretched, expanded, filled with knowledge that would have remained forever closed to her in Thebes. After breakfast, she gathered her writing kit, her own now, purchased with her own earnings. Reed brushes she'd selected herself. Ink cakes she'd learned to make. A palette worn smooth by use. I'll be home by midday, she told her mother. Be careful. Think before you speak. Remember that this opportunity is rare. Don't do anything to jeopardize it. I won't. But Meraret's worry was understandable. Every day that Nefret worked in the House of Life was a small miracle, a bending of normal rules. One misstep, one complaint from a senior priest who objected to a woman in the scriptorium, and it could all end. So Nefret was careful. She arrived early, left promptly. She spoke only when spoken to. She focused on her work with absolute concentration. She made herself invaluable through competence and invisibility. The House of Life was quiet when she arrived. Most scribes and priests were at morning prayers. Ketty was already at his desk, surrounded by scrolls. Good morning, he said without looking up. The surgical instrument text is on your table. Make 2 copies, one for the archives, one for the Royal Library. Yes, teacher. She'd taken to calling him teacher, though their relationship wasn't formally that of master and student. But he taught her daily, not just copying technique but the knowledge itself. Yesterday, he'd explained the theory of treating infected wounds with honey and copper compounds. The week before, he'd taught her to read astronomical tables, to calculate the positions of stars. The work was meditative. Her brush moved across papyrus in fluid strokes, each sign formed with precision, each word carrying weight. Medical knowledge that could save lives. Mathematical principles that could calculate harvests. Astronomical observations that mapped the heavens. This was why scribes existed. Not just to record, but to preserve. To carry human knowledge forward from one generation to the next, building an inheritance of wisdom. Hours passed. The sun climbed. Other scribes arrived, beginning their own work. Some nodded to her politely. Some ignored her. A few still disapproved of her presence but had learned that Ketty, and more importantly, the overseer of the House of Life, supported her work. Finished, she announced, holding up the completed copies. Ketty examined them carefully, comparing her work to the original. He nodded. Excellent. Your hieratic is becoming very refined. Look here, these ligatures are particularly elegant. Thank you. Take these to the archive room. Tell the keeper they're ready for storage. As Nefret carried the scrolls through the House of Life's corridors, she passed a courtyard where senior priests were teaching students, all male, all from good families. They studied not just writing but rhetoric, law, religious texts, administrative procedures. The full scribal education. She paused, watching. One of the teachers noticed her. Can we help you? No, honored one. Just delivering scrolls to the archives. Then move along. This is not a place for gawking. Yes, honored one. She continued to the archive room, but the encounter stung. She could copy texts, but she couldn't be a student. She could work in the House of Life, but she wasn't really part of it. She existed in a strange liminal space, more than a woman should be, less than a scribe could be. Was that enough? On her walk home, she passed the pyramid. Workers swarmed over it. The project was perhaps 2/3 complete. Another year, maybe 2, and it would be finished. Then what? Would her family return to Thebes? Would this opportunity evaporate like morning mist? At home, she found her father reviewing accounts and her mother at her loom. Nefret had established a modest weaving business here, supplying cloth to workers' families. Not as prestigious as her Thebes clientele, but steady income. How was work? Her father asked. Good. I finished the surgical text. Ketty seems pleased with your progress. He is. He's teaching me so much, father. Not just copying, real understanding. Medical theory, astronomy, mathematics. Things I never dreamed I'd learn. Nakht smiled. And you're happy? The question made her pause. Was she happy? She was fulfilled. Challenged. Grateful. But happy? I'm not sure, she said slowly. I'm learning. I'm doing meaningful work. But I also feel like I'm always proving myself, always one mistake away from losing everything. And I see what the male students get, the full education, the clear path to careers, the certainty, and I wonder if what I have is enough. Is anything ever enough? Her father asked. I'm chief of supply for a royal pyramid project. Good position, important work. But I see the overseer of works and think, could I have risen that high? I see the vizier's scribes and wonder, could I have served in the royal court? There's always something more. But you could have those things, potentially. The path exists. For me. The path doesn't exist yet. You're creating it. What if I fail? What if you succeed? That evening, Kimwasit came home from his new scribal school, excited about a mathematics problem he'd solved. Nefret served dinner, fish from the Nile, vegetables from the local market, bread she'd baked that morning. They ate together on the rooftop, as they always did, watching the sun set behind the pyramid. The massive structure dominated the horizon, a monument to ambition and mortality, to the human desire to create something that outlasted flesh. Do you miss Thebes? Nefret asked suddenly. Her family exchanged glances. Nefret answered first. Sometimes. I miss my mother's grave. I can't visit it to make offerings. I miss my old workshop, my established clients. But I don't regret coming here. I miss my friends, Kimwasit said. But I like the challenge here. The competition. The feeling that I'm part of something important. I miss knowing what comes next, Nakht said. In Thebes, I could see my future clearly. Here, everything is uncertain. But uncertainty is also possibility. The question is, which is more valuable? Certainty or possibility? Both, Nefret said. Ideally, both. Ideally, her father agreed. But we rarely get ideal. We get choices, trade-offs, gambles. And did our gamble pay off? Nakht looked at his daughter, at the ink stains on her fingers, the knowledge in her eyes, the competence she'd built through 6 months of careful work. Ask me again in 10 years. Or 20. Or when you're old and looking back on your life. That's when we'll know if we chose wisely. That's a long time to wait for an answer. All the important answers take a long time. The stars emerged, one by one, the same stars that had watched over Egypt for thousands of years. The same stars that would watch for thousands more, long after everyone alive today had crossed to the western lands. Nefret thought about the text she'd copied: medical knowledge, astronomical observations, mathematical principles. Knowledge that would outlast her, that would be read by people not yet born, that would connect past to future through the medium of reed brush and papyrus. This was the scribe's true immortality. Not individual fame, but contribution to the great chain of learning. Every text copied was a link in that chain. Every student taught was a link. Every piece of knowledge preserved was a link. She was a link now. Small, uncertain, easily overlooked. But real. "I want to stay," she said suddenly. "When the pyramid is finished, when we could go back to Thebes, I want to stay here. I want to keep learning. Keep working. Keep building this path that doesn't exist yet." "That's years away," Nefret said gently. "Things might change. You might change. I know. But right now, that's what I want." "Then we'll see," Nakht said. "We'll see what's possible. What we can build. Together." The family sat in silence, looking at the stars, feeling the solid earth beneath them and the uncertain future pressing down like the weight of sky. But they were together. They had chosen possibility over certainty, had gambled on change rather than accept stagnation. And in the shadow of a pyramid, that monument to human ambition, to the desire to create something eternal, they had found not answers but questions worth asking. That, perhaps, was enough. For now.